But what we're calling for in the report, in this first of the 3 clusters I'll mention, is a coordinated effort across whole of government to increase our understanding of lived religion. And we call for the National Security Council to coordinate. It's a relatively small office, but it's close to the president and can coordinate efforts not only in state and defense, where one would expect we need greater and deeper sophistication in religion, but also in health and human services, in Department of Education and energy, across the board, whole of government. Because if we're going to engage community to community, include civil society, I'll mention how important diplomacy will be in a moment, but not merely at the most elite level, the governmental level. All of these agencies have to come up to speed in terms of our foreign service, ambassadors, diplomats, special envoys, who have to have some basic, or have people with them in these regions and countries who understand the nuances, the lived experience of people on the ground. In order to do that, there's a lot of particular recommendations that are included in the report for how to approach that, including what I find very interesting and creative. It's not unique to us. Tom Friedman has written about it. There's been a lot of discussion about it. But we have a resource of people who've been on the battlefront in Iraq and Afghanistan, our military and civilian leaders there who have real firsthand knowledge of what it means to engage lived religion, to understand not only the difference between Sunni and Shia, but which cleric in the Shia world, which Ayatollah, which religious leader really understands this sector of the society and has influence. How do we interact with local religious actors? We have people returning from those fronts who have had firsthand experience at important levels. We need to integrate them into the educational mission. That's one of the recommendations. So there is quite a bit across the board in the report about how do we engage, beginning with a whole of government approach, in improving our nuanced understanding of the complicated religious dynamics in so many theaters and societies around the world that we want to engage intelligently. A second area to mention is, and this is just one of several, but what are the impediments to engaging communities in a sophisticated way, governmentally, non-governmentally? One of them in the past has been the assumption that many in government have held, apparently, that it's forbidden to engage religion. And it's forbidden precisely by the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That we just cannot effectively, as governmental agencies or representatives, engage religious communities for fear of violating church-state separation, quote unquote, and other provisions that seem to be interpreted under the Establishment Clause. This is erroneous. It is not an impediment to engaging religious communities. We come out unanimously in the report to ask the President to clarify that the Establishment Clause does not prohibit government engagement with religious communities around the world. There is some disagreement in the report about a subpoint under this question about clarifying the Establishment Clause. Namely, are the means by which governmental agencies engage people working in development, in healthcare, in conflict transformation, in these local communities and in these national communities, are the means of that engagement constrained under the Establishment Clause? And the majority of folks in the report believe, following the legal experts, constitutional experts on the task force, that there well may be constraints that need to be clarified, whereas other people on the report think it really is not productive to begin to ask about constraints, because it's enough to say, and it's appropriate to say, that the Establishment Clause does not constrain engagement. So we have difference of emphasis about how to interpret the application, but we're completely unanimous that it ought to be clarified across government agencies. It ain't forbidden to engage religion. Okay, so thank you. So that's the second. I'd be happy for many here's anytime I conclude, if you don't mind. My third and final of my cluster of recommendations, and again I'm skimming the surface, is on the question of religious freedom. Which is part of our recommendations, because we have recommendations for the National Security Council, I've mentioned, also for the President, among other non-governmental organizations. We have ideas and all kinds of suggestions. We're asking the President to move with dispatch to name an ambassador at large for religious freedom. That position is unfilled. It was established in the International Religious Freedom Act under the Clinton administration, and there have been, as you know, ambassadors for religious freedom. The Obama administration, we're asking, needs to appoint, not merely to appoint an ambassador, that's important, but to appoint an ambassador who can address a real challenge in lifting up religious freedom as an important universal human right and a right guaranteed in our Constitution, which the task force agrees, I think unanimously, is a very important element of any kind of engagement policy. The question is, how do we engage on the question of religious freedom? And as Richard mentioned, there's controversy about this because religious freedom is sometimes used in scare quotes by people who oppose it, and they're scared of it. That is, religious freedom doesn't mean to open up the public square to majority as well as minority religions. Instead, what it means, some are worried, it's a mask for U.S. foreign policy that is an attempt to advance narrowly conceived U.S., read that, Christian or worse for some, Judeo-Christian interest in not only the Muslim world, but in India, in China, and elsewhere. So religious freedom has unfortunately become distorted and misconstrued as a narrow and cynical policy tool or weapon to advance narrowly conceived, culturally driven, religiously driven U.S. interests. This is not what we mean by religious freedom. It's not what IRFA meant by religious freedom. It's not what our Constitution means. Instead, what we mean by religious freedom is the freedom for religious groups, whether they're in the majority or the minority within a state, because majority religious communities are also persecuted and repressed by states. And we are calling for the ambassador at large to be appointed to work hard to clarify and to move forward for ways that assure that a robust engagement on the question of religious freedom understands it appropriately, which is to welcome into the public square a variety of public actors, whether they're from a majority or minority religious community, who play within the rule of law and who observe the rules of civil nonviolent discourse, and as a result, enhance religious pluralism, which, as we know from many studies and experiences, is a key to democratization. It's also a way to temper religious extremism or to identify the religious extremists who refuse to play by the rules. We want more religious expression in these communities, not less. We sometimes can shake our head about our own country with its religious this and religious that and so much. We've got Catholics up here and evangelicals and Muslims and Jews and Hindus and what else, and they just don't shut up, and that's a wonderful thing. Because since they have that ability to organize in the public square, they're in the public square, we're not yet throwing a lot of real bombs. And we're not yet shooting one another, for the most part, God forbid, precisely because there's an open public square, and this is a key part of engaging communities. We want to support them. Final thing I'll say about this is, one of the questions, what do you do when you're engaging religious actors, and these include anti-American, violent extremists, those prone to it. There are 6 criteria set forth by a previous task force report led by Madeleine Albright, principles for engaging hostile groups, and those we found very sound. We repeated them and endorsed them in the report, and because we don't think it's prudent to completely isolate any kind of somewhat complicated, internally plural, even negative or hostile religious movement, when in fact there are elements within it that can be usefully engaged under certain circumstances. We're not naive about who we want to engage. We're shrewd about it. So in summary, we're looking for a framework and we're providing a framework, we hope, and some policy directions for engagement through religious literacy across the board, whole of government, through clarifying the openness within our constitutional system to shrewd and smart engagement, governmentally, non-governmentally, universities, civil society, and the like. And not least, we want to clarify and strengthen the presence of religious freedom while not having it backfire for us or for others around the world because it's misunderstood or it's misused or misappropriated. We want to be very sensitive to that as well.